Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new podcast, our old podcast on a new channel. This is On the Curbs, the IndyCar edition. My name is Nate Woods, and I am joined with my co-host, Thiemo Albers-Daly. Thiemo, how we doing?
We're back, Nate. We're back. IndyCar 2025.
I know.
It's
Yeah.
happened finally. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We spent the last couple seasons over on across the pond, and now we're making the switch over to a channel you're a little bit more familiar with, I believe.
I'd say so, yeah, seeing as I founded it. It's a little bit, we thought it'd be a good time to do it with NBC switching over to Fox. We thought we'll try something
Yeah,
similar to that and see if we
we'll
can
try a
make
new
the same
channel
magic
as well.
happen.
That's right. So, yeah, our off season has finally come to an end, and we had some on track action for IndyCar this week, and yeah, it's been a fun time.
Yeah, and Fox immediately bringing in the numbers as well, which I was quite pleasantly surprised at. I mean, we were both a little bit unsure of how things would go. We saw in the off season that their marketing team, at the very least, knew what they were doing with those promos. They
Yes.
were good fun, and I thought this is exactly what F1 is trying to do for the last 7 years with Netflix, and Fox has managed to do it in 30 seconds. Um,
Yeah.
it did a brilliant job, and the thing for me, I thought initially the numbers you've got on here, I saw them earlier, 1.4 million views across the race weekend. I thought, oh, I wasn't too familiar with the numbers before. I thought not too bad considering it's a network channel in a massive country like that. But then you compare it to last year, it's a 45% increase from the season over
Right.
last year, and it's the most watched non-Indy 500 race 2011. You go, oh, that's actually quite impressive.
Yes. Yeah. So, um, it was a big draw. I think it had a great spot on Fox's lineup for Sunday because we had warm up, the Fox Sports and Fox Sports 2. We had lead ups. We had the warm up session was televised. We had the qualifying for Indy Next was televised, and then immediately went into the Indy Next race. And then you switched over to Fox and you had the IndyCar race, and then you stayed on Fox for the NASCAR race. And so, yeah, I think you had a lot of people that were, tuning in for NASCAR, which is great. That's, I think, exactly what Fox wanted. I mean, they ran a ton of promos, and of course, four-time Indy 500 champion Helio Castroneves taking part in the Daytona 500 didn't hurt, I'm sure.
No,
So, put a lot of eyes on the sport that normally wouldn't tune in. So, but there was some chatter about their graphics, though. And I don't know if you caught any of this online in the Twitterverse or YouTube verse or wherever you get your data from, but some mixed emotions about the graphics there at Fox.
yeah, I didn't catch any of the reaction to it. I just noticed it from watching the race itself. And I liked the idea of it. It took me a minute to catch on that those were there because I'm pretty sure I'm either imagining this and hallucinating or I'm pretty sure F1 have been doing a similar thing for a while. So it didn't click immediately that it was a new thing for IndyCar. So it made sense. And then I think a little bit after they pointed it out in the commentary and I went, oh yeah, okay,
Mhm.
no, that's new. I like the idea of it. Um, but maybe I just wasn't looking at it with as critical an eye as everyone else is because it doesn't seem to have gone down exactly in the same way for everyone.
Yeah, I it definitely needs some revisions, I think. Uh, and being the first race out of the gate for Fox, you can't necessarily fault them. It's going to
Mm.
be a learning process for them to kind of find that sweet spot on what information IndyCar fans expect versus what NASCAR fans expect. And, NASCAR, it's, speed, RPMs, and the position they're out on the track. And that's really what those fans want to see. Where IndyCar, I'm not saying that we're more refined viewers, but there's a lot more information that we
There's a
want.
more technical
Um,
aspect to it.
Correct, yes. And um, you know, it'll, like I said, it'll take them a little bit of time to hone in what exactly us fans want and expect on that telemetry they're showing on the screen. I also think that it's me personally, I think it's kind of gimmicky to display it kind of as a rainbow across the arrow screen. But
Yeah, it's one of those things. The
yeah.
layout was there perfect for it to be utilized in that way, and you can see why they wanted to do that. But again, it's you've got to try these things out. And I think the one thing, even though we've only had the one race so far, pre all of this, when they got the rights to it in the first place, they did make everyone pretty happy straight away with how they were approaching with everything. It's kind of like you've got this new lineup for commentary, you've got a mix of old and new, you've got promotional material that I was saying that earlier. Everyone was so happy with it and going, "This is what we wanted it to look like for years." And so I think that they listened to everyone in that respect. So hopefully that continues now, and I don't see why they wouldn't. And like you say, you're never going to get everything perfect first time out the gate. So by the end of the season, if it's still like this, then I think we've got more of a cause for a bit of a ruckus. But I'll be surprised if that's the case.
Yeah, one thing I noticed was that the timing and scoring pylon on the side of the screen during the broadcast wasn't necessarily always displaying the correct information, which
Yeah, I did notice that too.
when I watch these races, I'm watching the broadcast on TV, but I also have the IndyCar app open, and I'm watching their timing and scoring as well, plus listening to their broadcast. And usually the IndyCar broadcast, the app is 10 seconds behind the television broadcast. That was causing confusion on the televised end because they were showing fewer laps than what the app that's supposed to be delayed is showing. So I think they eventually got it worked out somewhere in like lap 25 or 30 when they went into a commercial break. Somewhere they lost a lap. And so that made it a little confusing for the first part of the race. But they also had some issues with their tire um, compound graphic that when they were showing which teams were running blacks and alternates, it wasn't always actually matching up to what you were seeing on track. But I think that's just something that they got to work out and they'll get there. That's obviously that's not a timing and scoring where it's you know somebody or a electronic process where it's keeping track of time. That's somebody's having to go in and say, oh, Alex Pillow put on alternate tires. We're going to push this button and tell the computer that, hey, he's got this tire on.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's TV problems that you're going to have at the start of the season. And I think it's just one of those things that perhaps you can be generous and say it falls through the cracks a little bit with that migration over. And they say, but we've got that big gap now between this round and the Thermal Club. It could all potentially be solved before or be done in time for that, and we get there.
Yeah,
And whatever you'll say about Thermal Club, you'll be like, well, at least we've got this sorted.
that's right. So one thing that they didn't talk about hardly at all on the broadcast was the hybrid system.
Yeah, I found
Literally,
that
they mentioned
interesting.
it once. Yeah, they mentioned it once somewhere towards the back half of the race, and that was it. And it was unfortunately it was they mentioned it in the same breath as Will Power, uh, where he had hybrid issues and the last race last year that essentially took him out of contention for the championship, and um, then started the weekend off with more hybrid issues. So, but they
Yeah.
only mentioned it once, which I thought was kind of a strange departure from NBC broadcast last year because it was all they talked about. It felt like in some cases.
I would have thought that. I mean, again, I didn't watch the pre-race build-up, so I don't know how much maybe they mentioned it there. But it seemed curious that as you're on a new network, you're at the start of a season. If you were going to do an in-depth piece of it at any point, now would be that time, especially if you've got that casual new audience coming over from NASCAR who happen to have just turned on a bit earlier. But like I say, it was mentioned maybe once during the race. I caught it in FP1 because I can't remember who it was, but there was someone who. Um, Needed to restart essentially, which the cars can obviously do because of the hybrid system that was mentioned.
Mhm.
Because otherwise it would have brought out a red flag at that point. But aside from that, like you say, barely mentioned, and it's just a bit of a curious one because you think if you're trying to engage with new fans and everything, that would be a great point to go. Here's 30 seconds. Here's what you need to know. Boom,
Mhm.
done.
Yeah,
So again, it'd be interesting to see if that changes at all over the course of the season, if they're approaching that, or if we just missed it. Maybe I don't know, but I'd have thought between the
yeah,
two of us, one of us would have called it.
yeah. But we have a few points of driver and team news. Probably be worth mentioning before we get into the race recap. Rinus VK found a home at the very last moment. It feels like.
Yeah, very happy about that. I mean, it was a worry there for a while, the touch and go. We were both wondering what's going to happen. It'd be such a shame for him not to end up on the grid this year, but Dayle Coyne took him in, and for that we are very grateful. And he's driving a full-time schedule as well, so it's not
Yeah,
just a little bit here, a little bit there. We've got all of it, so I'm very happy with that. I think you're very happy with that. I think he's very
yeah,
happy with that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure he is. Yeah, absolutely. And we got word last week that Tony Kanaan has been elevated to team principal at Arrow McLaren.
Yeah, one of the quickest turnarounds from driver to boss I think we've ever
Yeah,
seen,
I
just across
think
motorsport, never
so.
mind IndyCar.
Yeah, yeah, that was came as a little bit of a shock, and yeah, we've mentioned it on this show before. Last year, Tony Kanaan has a penchant for cutting me off in traffic, and he did it again last week. So
He's just consistent. It's just
yeah,
how this is going to go for you.
I guess he still has that racer mentality. You can't get that out of the man. So
No, it'd be interesting to see how he does in that role over the course of the season because it's like you say we've seen similar things before. We've seen drivers become advisors or step into roles with a team that they've been involved with a long time. You see that across all motorsport series, but to get
yeah.
that kind of important role pretty much straight away after hanging up the lid, as it were, and we're not totally convinced that that is permanent with him in some respects in terms of coming out for the odd race here or there, maybe in not necessarily Indy, but in other places. It'll be interesting to see
Mhm.
how that transfers over to dealing with the drivers and managing the team when you've got such recent experience, particularly on going back to the hybrid when you've got that kind of a new thing that's coming. He's had experience with that a little bit. It's just interesting to see how that all will gel together.
Yeah, I think it opens a lot of interesting doors for Aaron McLaren to have someone like Tony Kanaan heading that operation. Um, yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see how that kind of works out this season. I know they're kind of throwing him in with the Sharks, but he was in the series for so long. I would have to think that he picked up some tricks of the trade along the way, just
You'd hope
peering
so.
over someone's shoulder. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think we can pretty much jump into the race weekend at this point. Um,
Yeah, I think
the,
it was
the
an interesting race. I think it was one of those ones where there's not as much to talk about in some respects because if there was action, but there was less action than maybe we were both expecting. But it still served as a nice appetizer, I think, for the season ahead, especially with some of the
mhm.
overarching themes that we'll get to.
Yeah, so honestly, there's not a lot to talk about in the middle part of this race, I felt like. Um, Lap one, of course, we had a caution flag. Very unlike Will Power, I feel like.
Yeah,
He got into the rear end of Nolan Siegel, and they both end up in the wall. And also, unfortunately, Louis Foster was back behind them and got caught up in his own accident. And yeah, unfortunate for those three drivers, but Will Power, I mean, what a way to start the season.
yeah, it was really curious watching the replay of it multiple times, and it looked like he got tagged by someone else, but it wasn't the case. It didn't look like it was a willpower kind of thing to happen. That's
Mhm.
how uncharacteristic it was. It wasn't even a willpower style crash. It was something that even he's not kind of done before in that respect. And
Yeah.
yeah, just a really not a good way for him to start a season. And you're thinking after last season, right, we just need to make sure we get through that first race. We have no issues. And on the one hand, we go, well, you're not going to get disqualified. But on the other hand, you're not going to make it to the end of the race either. And you
Yeah,
go, that's not quite
he
what I meant.
he he's in a better place coming out of this weekend this year than he was last year, obviously. Last
But the
year,
bar was so low.
the Penske organization got hit with that big penalty after St. Pete last year. He started what 25 points negative last season after.
Yeah, yeah,
So, to come out of this with just a point that's better than 26 points better than last year, I guess
yeah,
would
yeah.
be one thing
Maybe
you
he needs
could
to
if
hire
you're
you
gonna
as a spin doctor.
if you're gonna put a silver lining to it. So, but unfortunately for those guys, especially Louis Foster, I mean, first
Yeah.
race with Rahal Letterman coming up as last year's Indy Next champion. It's just not the weekend I'm sure he wanted, but I'm sure we'll
No,
we'll get
I
to
think
see him
that
again.
the only confidence they can take from it is that they were saying up to that point of the weekend everything was going well. So at least you
Was
know you
going
didn't
well
have
for
any
him.
issues with anything else. So while it's unfortunate to get caught out like that, at least you know it's not a mechanical issue. It's not something partly through the race that forces you to retire. It was just racing.
Yeah. The one thing that came from that caution was, uh, you had several drivers that started on alternate tires, and they only have to be on those alternates for 2 laps before they can
Yeah.
pit. And so, under caution, they were able to come in, get off the alternates, get back on the primaries, and that kind of set up a different strategy for a lot of teams that started the race on the primaries. I think they were kind of hoping that you know the race would start green and they'd get past that 10 to 13 lap threshold where those alternate tires kind of fell off, and then that was going to be the best strategy to start on the primaries. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for those teams, and it kind of bit a lot of these guys that started on the primaries, but they still ended up with good finishes, I think. Um,
Hmm.
you know,
And so
like
you
we
got some
mentioned
alternate
after,
strategies that came into play with it, and I think everyone kind of made the best of an awkward situation because it's like you say, best laid plans, and then immediately you don't even make it to what turn 5 before everything goes
yeah,
to hell on your strategy.
yeah, but that was the only caution flag that we had all day was first lap.
Yeah, which
So
is pretty impressive.
kudos to the driving. Yeah, it is impressive. We don't often see that. Um, in NASCAR, we have
I was
the
thinking
saying,
the
cautions
sixth
breed
Miata race
cautions,
had
but
more cautions.
yeah. So yeah, we went the rest of the race without any cautions. We had a ton of exciting green flag stops that really kind of helped build tension with the tire strategies, I think,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
is
no, definitely.
great. I mean, that's what that's part of why we have that two tire setup in IndyCar that NASCAR doesn't have is um, to help build that tension throughout the race and put another aspect into the racecraft and the strategy of the race. Very similar
Hmm.
to F1, and
Yeah.
so the excitement on track, a lot of a lot of good passing on track. I thought the product during the race was good. Maybe not the most exciting for maybe some of those first time viewers, or those guys that were tuning in before the NASCAR race. But if they
I think if you're an
just tuned
endurance
in,
fan, you'd have enjoyed it a lot more than
yes,
casual like
yeah,
pure racer fans. Like you say, that tire strategy element came into it, and because of I want to say the ease of which you can overtake an IndyCar, but if you compared that approach to racing with how F1 has it, IndyCar definitely you're not going to come out necessarily down in 20th and you'll be stuck there and you can't really do anything about it because of the track or whatever.
yeah,
You can then go and pull back ahead, and you saw this a lot with McLaughlin in particular. He kind of obviously fell back, but then towards the end he was able to come back into play a little bit. You had Palou obviously doing the switch back from he qualified a bit lower down to then take the lead. And you had Scott Dixon in there as well. You had Newgarden in there, and you was kind of like again you only need one caution here to throw things up. We need to do one pit stop to go slightly wrong for you, and then you're in the drink. And Lundgaard can come back into play. In theory, you don't know
right,
because he's trying a different strategy, and it's that kind of thing. It may be, like you say, not as action packed as a NASCAR race in terms of potentially a bit into NASCAR here, but you're not going to get as much crashing as you might be used
right,
to spice things
yeah.
up. But there is that other form of excitement that you can take that thrill and that tension from, as you were saying.
luckily the NASCAR fans that were tuning in for just the end of the IndyCar race got
Yeah,
treated with some pretty good laps there at the end. For about lap 88 on, when you had the drama
yeah.
of Alex Palou had a great lead leading up into those last dozen laps, but 6, 7 seconds somewhere in there, I think, over Joseph Newgarden, and he came up on the traffic at the back of the field that was trying to stay on the lead lap. Stingray Rob did a great job of staying out in front of Alex Palou. I don't think that he was necessarily holding up Alex Palou, but that did give a couple drivers opportunity to catch up to Palou. And there in the last final laps, when you had Palou, Newgarden, and Dixon running one, two, three, all in the same screen, that's great for the sport, no matter how casual of a fan you might be.
And I think as well, it is one of my underrated favorite parts of IndyCar is the fact that you can come up behind a car that is either on track ahead of you but isn't going to stay there because of just how the pit stop windows work, or you're coming up to lap them, but they're not obligated to move out of your way. If you want to get
Right.
past them, you have to go and do it yourself. They're not going to be given a blue
Mm-hmm.
flag. And so
Right.
you can make the argument about him holding him up or whatever, but he's entitled to be there and he can do whatever he wants. And it's kind of the challenge then for Palou, especially when you're a driver like Palou, well, you're a three-time champ. You shouldn't have any trouble getting past them, and should you go and do it? And you've got to then work
That's right.
for it. And on a completely separate note, but related to twisting me, Rob, I just like the fact that you've got a freedom service dog sticker on the rear wing. Though, and we got a lot of views of that. It's a great promotion. You've got Polo in the
Yep.
background. It's just that you couldn't have asked for better if you're the people who put that on there.
Yeah. Yep. So going into the next to last lap, Newgarden had some issues that had him slip down to third. Dixon got around him. I They were a little light with the information during the broadcast. I felt with what was going on with him, and maybe they just didn't know until after the race. But sounds like there were a few issues with Newgarden there in the closing lap. That
Yeah, I'm curious. Maybe he just pulled the trigger a bit too soon and just simply ran out of tires. It's how it came out of how it came across to me a little bit in that respect of you can push, but maybe you pushed too soon or thought you were going to get closer in a shorter time than you actually did. And unfortunately for him, A, he didn't, and B, you've got someone called Scott Dixon behind you who knows a thing or two about this racing malarkey and is able to perform beautiful moves on you on the
yeah.
final lap of the race.
Yeah, Newgarden, they were worried about his fuel, and I guess, during his last two pit stops, they were uncertain whether they got a full tank of gas in the car, and uh, so they told him to, trim his fuel consumption back. And from what I understand, he accidentally hit his emergency throttle button on his steering wheel, and uh, basically throws the car into a limp mode until you get it rebooted. So
Not what you want
yeah,
when
it's
you're chasing another
unfortunate,
lead.
but yeah, yeah, yeah. Still finished third though. So
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, Alex Palou was our winner. He came out ahead of Scott Dixon by 2.8 seconds. And Newgarden, even with his issues on the last lap, the second to last lap, still finished third, 6.2 seconds back.
Yeah, so like you say, it was a great start, and then kind of this wait and see middle where you're waiting to see if anything actually happens. If you're the fan that is more accustomed to the chaos that we know IndyCar can produce, but then with that chaotic end where Scott Dixon, as then transpired, didn't have a radio or a spotter for the entire race, just showing how much
Yeah.
of a beast he is with the 20 plus
Yes.
years. I mean, Will Buxton was saying in commentary that he saw him in the gym earlier that weekend or in the week, and just how insane he looks is kind of made me think of Hugh Jackman for Deadpool and Wolverine, the kind of training he put in for that to look that. got that version for ourselves in IndyCar with Scott Dixon, and it goes and shows that. And again, just the ease of which that he can take on someone like Newgarden and get past him on the last lap, even with those issues you go, you still got to get past him. It's still a tricky street circuit, and you can be caught out at the best of times. But as much as it kind of maybe smarts on Newgarden as well that you lose that position on the last lap, if you're Scott Dixon, how annoyed are you again that you still can't win in St. Petersburg? You get another second place. He's got so much in his accolade book, and yet a win at St. Pete is just not one of them. And you go,
Yeah.
how long is he staying in this sport just to get that? Does he care
Just to
enough
get
for
that
that,
win.
or is it just that
Yeah.
one thing that irks him still that keeps him awake at night?
Yeah. It definitely kudos to Scott Dixon for running that race without any communication with his team. I don't know whether it was, his cord came undone or a battery pack was expired or something with that. But yeah, I mean, that's to run that kind of a race that he did without any communication from the team. I mean, that's any other driver in that series, it would have been an issue, I think,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not for
It
him.
just shows if that's him on an off day and you're new to the sport, you go, yeah, that's him when he's not underperforming, but like when he's at a disadvantage. You wait till you see
Yeah,
him when he's got the bit between his teeth.
right. So, but team analysis, Team Penske. We had
Yeah.
obviously we mentioned Scott
Yeah.
or Will Power. Uh, Bad start for him. Qualified 13th, finished 26th. Joseph Newgarden and Scott McLaughlin. Scott, I think they were kind of running the same strategy.
Hmm.
Scott McLaughlin led a big chunk of the beginning part of this race, qualified on the pole. Still, even with his strategy being off, still managed to finish fourth, and Joseph Newgarden finished third.
Yeah, it was very much a case for those two particular of close but no cigar. And I think if McLaughlin hadn't started on pole, I wouldn't have been as miffed about it. And I think the new guy's problems, like you say, potentially self-inflicted. So it still managed to leave me a little bit disappointed with their performance, but at the same time, if I'm disappointed with them being third and fourth, if we just ignore power, then it's not too bad a time of it. And again, you compare it to the start of last season, and admittedly, there's still time for that to go wrong for us between
Yeah.
now and Thermal Club. I probably shouldn't have said that. But I think it's still not too shabby. I just think that for a team like that, it's unfortunate that Pole wasn't able to capitalize on. They were beaten by someone who started behind them. They had these issues, these uncharacteristic issues for New Garden and Power that just made you think, come on, guys, you know what you're doing. Hopefully, that's you with the last of those kind of issues for the season. If you're going to have issues for the rest of it, it better be because someone's crashed into you or because the car's just decided it's not going to work. It better not be for anything like this moving forward. That was my take anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Arrow McLaren. Um, kind of how would you
You might
classify
you,
their
you
weekend, I guess?
Well, I was going to see if you were going to be kinder about it than I was, because I was saying the good news for Penske is that at least they weren't Arrow McLaren this weekend.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I loved Lundgaard's performance across the weekend. He had a bit of a
Mhm.
ball-to-the-wall strategy that I'd enjoy. It was a shame it didn't work out, and I was kind of curious as to why they did employ it, because the soft tires weren't performing from what I saw across the weekend up to that point with especially how little time they actually were in a good window to be used and how minimal that was early on, and you saw in the practice sessions. So I was surprised they went with that option in that respect, but I liked that they probably didn't think they were going to win anyway, so why not try it? Lugard finishing P8, can't fault it. It was nice to see him running up the front. Plateau in P11, that obviously the tyre debris that he got early on didn't help and kind of screwed him over a little bit. But again, your paddle board, you should be able to get a bit further in to the top 10, or not being just outside it for me. And Nolan, you can't
Yeah.
do anything about that. It's just bad stuff happens. But it just left me again going, come on, you can all do a bit better than this.
Well, and for me, this is a team that has had a huge restructure in the offseason. They retained
Sure.
Pato Ward and Nolan Siegel got that ride last year, and then they bring in Christian Lundgaard, which is a great driver, but I think was still untested with a top tier team. And to have your untested driver beating your
It it felt a
franchise
little bit to
driver,
me
we'll
like
call him.
bringing in Table Chair for Long Beach and then him going, guys, why am I the one leading this?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, really hope that Nolan Siegel can rebound going into Thermal Club. Unfortunate start for him. I really would have liked to see more from Pedal Ward. Had a horrible qualifying session and
Yeah.
just felt like he didn't leave anything on the track and or left you know a little bit desired after qualifying anyway. But
I mean, him and
a
Powell
team
both getting
that
knocked out in qualifying was insane, and you just think that
yeah.
again for a first session, please let this be the one exception because we need you all up there to keep this as exciting as we were promised for it.
So another team that kind of had up and down mixed results was Andretti Global.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit like Penske here, but not as damning. Um, Kirkwood had an absolutely great race, I thought, and it was good to
Yeah.
see him that high up, and he had a consistent performance across the weekend, and given how last season went for Marcus Ericsson, I was just happy to see him back near the sharp end. So while we may be wanting to see him in that top three, for him to be just P6 for no issues, for no drama of any kind, for him to just actually get the chance to get there with no
Yeah.
hassle, I was just happy with that. But Hurst dropping back from P2 was not ideal, and then finishing down in P16 again, it was a bit curious. And again, maybe this is my fault because I put him in my fantasy IndyCar team, and as I told you about pre-record,
Yeah.
that did not go well for most of my drivers. So maybe I need to sort that out. But unfortunately, the way they structured that is that I've got them all contracted for 3 races at minimum. So I don't like what I've potentially done to these people.
Well, with Colton Herta, qualifying second and then finishing in 16th, uh, this goes back. I mean, this has been a problem with his team in particular, his cars team in particular, where they, for some reason, miss strategies so badly. And it seems like a constant struggle for several seasons now with his car. How many races and how many potential championships have we lost with this driver
Yeah.
based on poor strategy?
It does
You
smack of
know,
Ferrari from yesteryear in F1 of why are you
yes,
doing this?
yeah, and we forget sometimes. I know I forget he's only 24 years old, and
Yeah, I
you
definitely
know
forget that.
at, at what point does he become like a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen in F1 where they question team strategy on the radio during a race? When
Yeah.
does he say, okay, enough is enough? Why are we doing this? You have to explain it to me.
I think to continue that Ferrari analogy, he's reminded me of Carlos Sainz from a couple of years ago when he didn't question it, he just started deciding the strategy for himself and going, I'm not doing that, I'm doing this instead, and then goes and wins a Grand Prix for the first time and goes,
Yeah,
see, that's how am I doing that in the car with much less information than you got? And yet maybe this is where we need to have that crossover moment. So yeah, hopefully that's not again the theme here for these teams is hopefully this doesn't continue in the same fashion for the season because otherwise I'm not sure what's going on. But on the other hand, if that does continue, maybe we get some of these other teams that we're not used to seeing up near the shop and going, fine, I'll take that race win instead, or I'll take that podium, and that
yeah,
would be great for the sport as well. So you just think from
yeah,
that driver's perspective, how long are you putting up with that kind of um, kerfuffle? It's going to be the polite word I use, I
yeah,
think, for that.
yeah, yeah. One team that had arguably the best weekend, obviously, was Chip Ganassi with
Yeah,
Pillow and Dixon finishing one and two, and Kiffin Simpson, decent weekend. I think you kind of have to have an asterisk next to Kiffin Simpson with this team,
yeah.
at least for this season.
Yeah, I was always going to be intrigued to see how Chip Ganassi as a whole did with the reduction, obviously, from what was it, 5 cars last year down to three,
Yeah,
and
down to
how they were
three.
going to choose who was going to get that third seat in a way. But like you say, Kevin Simpson, it looks bad when you compare it to the other two, but you've got to have that asterisk of going, there are things attached to that. And also, it's a three-time champion in Polo. It's Scott Dixon, who you don't even need
Yeah,
to say any of the accolades because it's Scott
right.
Dixon. So he goes, you know what? It's not too bad. And I think this race in particular, considering where Polo qualified, just demonstrates so perfectly why he is that dangerous and why the rest of the grid needs to figure out that it's not all of you individually against him, it's all of you collectively against him. It almost doesn't matter who beats him at the end of the season, as long as one of you does. It's a little bit like Verstappen in
Yeah,
last year in F1 and this year, arguably. It's kind of instead of infighting, just put all your eggs in one of your baskets, or keep helping each other out, and you just go and beat him because otherwise, it's going to be like the charity football matches that you see of England v the rest of the world. It's 1-0 to Palou against everyone else at the moment, and it's a race where not that he shouldn't have won, but he shouldn't have won. If you get what I mean.
yeah, yeah. And it's obviously this is the first race of the season. It's still far too early to say, okay, here's our breakaway stars. Anything can happen in this sport. We got a long way to go. Actually, well, we say got a long way to go. This is the shortest season in auto sports. I mean, we only have 4 months, 5 months in the season. So um, it there's a lot that can happen. I'm not ready to say, oh, Pelo's going to win, but you kind of have that thought in the
It
back of
doesn't
your
help
mind. It's
either.
like he's a three-time defending champion. He's got a good resume. It would be, I don't want to say it's going to be detrimental to the sport if he wins. Alex
It
Blow,
just depends on
obviously,
how he wins. I think you don't want it to be a
right.
season like last year where it only potentially comes under threat in the last few races.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
want it to be challenged from the off, and you go back to the drivers that we're expecting to be up there, your Powers, your Hurters, your awards, and you go, that isn't going to plan at all. And whilst we've still got Scott Dixon, Scott McLaughlin, and
Mhm.
Joseph Newgarden up there, it's good to have them both kind of. You don't want them to then have a bad race at Thermal Club and for the others to do okay but not take their place because if Palou can do what he did last year, not necessarily win, but still just be consistently there, then it doesn't matter what the
Yeah,
rest of you do. And why I'm saying it's a matter of all of you against him together, not all of you individually against him, because that strategy, as we saw last year, ain't gonna work.
yeah, yeah. Another team that I think had a good weekend was AJ Foyt Racing. I feel like it's that Santino Ferrucci and David Malukas. In the off season when these guys were named, I think we kind of had some high hopes with this duo. At least I did. I know,
I'm with you. I'm with you.
and started not great. Ferrucci started 19th and Malukas started 17th, but they ran in the top 10 for a good chunk of this race, and still finished next to each other, although inverted. Ferrucci finished 14th and Malukas 13th. So, yeah, I think all around that's a good weekend for a team that has a new driver.
No, I wrote down there was a quietly solid race from the team. Like you say, it's a team where the driver combination is exciting. There's a lot of potential there, but they're also not a team where we're used to high results from them in the same way that we expect it from someone like Andretti or Ganassi. But I think that this is a really good, solid foundation to build on for the season and going off the season that that team had last year where you could see those bits of potential coming to fruition, and we see these
Mhm.
moments of joy for them. I think this is a good thing, and like you say, with Malukas, you're just obviously happy that he's there, that he's been able to get a seat at a team that is gonna keep him and is not gonna, short of any cycling accidents, isn't gonna abandon him at the first call, and you've got that balance then of not quite experienced and rookie, but as close to that as you can get with youth still very much attached to both of them at a team that is on the up potentially. And I think
Yeah.
this is going to be one of these not dark horses for the year, but it's one of these teams that is going to be able to capitalize on opportunities given to it if there is chaos up front. not even
Mhm.
necessarily going to have to rely on that all season. They're just going to be able to build on that, and that's going to be an interesting one to see. And if we're talking back to that everyone combined versus Pillow fight, this could be a team where going, well, it doesn't matter for us because we're not going for the wins and the championships as much as other teams are. We'll take the opportunity and get them, but we're not going to be beholden to kind of getting out of your way. It's kind of like Stingray Rob. He's got every right to be there in front of Pillow. You still got to get past him. So it's like, yeah, we want this, and it doesn't matter as much if we don't get it. So we're going to throw all the eggs at it, even in this economy, and see what we can get out of it.
Yeah, the technical alliance that AJ Foyt has with Penske and with Malukas kind of rumored to be the heir apparent to when Will Power decides to hang it up. I think there's
If
going to be a lot of attention put on this team this year, and uh, we saw flashes of greatness from Santino Ferrucci last season, and uh, we know that Malukas has the talent as well. So this is going to be a really fascinating team to watch this year, I think.
no, I agree with that.
Uh, Juncos Hollinger Racing, Stingray Robb and Connor Daly.
Yeah, results wise, not much to report there, I think, but I'm hopeful that this is another team that will develop over a somewhat, I'm guessing, slow burn as the season
Mhm.
progresses. It's again, Daly just he had appearances last year, but again, it's his not first full, well, kind of first full season in a way where he gets to know how long he's there for a change, and
Yeah,
unless there's something massive that happens, he's not going anywhere. And it's a team that he
yeah.
obviously had some experience with last year. He knows what's going on, so it's just that bedding in process. And you got the experience with Stingray Rob there as well. And I think it's like AJ Foyt. You're just going to be watching them see what happens. And we know that that team has potential from what we've seen from them before in the past. So it's going to be a case of
Mhm.
when does that transpire and how does it transpire? Is it needing an opportunity to fall their way in a more chaotic race, or is it going to be we're just going to be able to really nail these sorts of circuits? And we know what kind of day is like on an oval, so maybe as soon as we get to one of those, um,
Yeah,
we see that the street circuit's just maybe not where he's got the best experience at the moment. But as soon as we stick him on an oval again, okay, we're gone, and it's good,
yep.
and it's good.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting team to watch once we get into the oval part of the season. Obviously, we got a long ways to go before we get there. Um, um, but yeah, I mean, Connor Daly's always performed well at the Indianapolis 500, and when your stepdad runs the series now, it's uh, always good to have that pedigree as well. So, Meyer Shank Racing, unfortunate weekend, I would say for them. Um,
Yes and no,
even with
I'd say.
Felix Rosenquist, I think he salvaged a result that he should be proud of. Had great qualifying, qualifying third, and then finishing the race in seventh. But unfortunate incident for Marcus Armstrong, where qualified fourth. Great start to the weekend, but finished 24th.
Yeah, it's one of those just really unfortunate things for Armstrong. But I think when you look at preseason testing and then his qualifying here,
Mm,
he's another one of these drivers and another one of these teams, I think, where there's a lot more to it to come potentially for the season. Where obviously, I don't want this to be a bad luck season for him, and this is how it transpires. And this preseason testing was the highlight. I
yeah,
think he put in some really strong times in that testing session in Sebring, and it's going to be interesting to see how that then develops. It was a very much what if race, but I think Rosenquist a little bit like Marcus Ericsson for me. He's one of these drivers where we know he's capable of it. He just wasn't able to show that last season a lot because of various
yeah,
different reasons. So I think that while he obviously finished lower than where he started, I think that's probably where I would have expected him to be anyway, because of who else is around him. He's obviously a good driver, but he's not on the same level as your Palos, your Powers, your Dixons. So for him to be kind of not necessarily best of the rest, but just behind Marcus Ericsson is still pretty good. And I think Meyer Shank as a team is one that is still learning a lot and is still developing. So for them to be that high up and for that much potential, even though Armstrong has that essential DNF, doesn't reflect what we know could have
Right.
happened there, I think.
Yeah.
So
It,
I think it's unfortunate, but I think it's one of these ones where you don't want to dismiss it just off the results.
yeah, I think Meyer Shank, the driver lineup they have there is kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about with Juncos Hollinger. And Juncos is Connor Daly's waiting for the oval part of the season
Mm.
where these drivers are okay, these are our road course and street course guys. We're gonna bank these points at these tracks and then just suffer through our oval schedule. So
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. Um,
I summed this up quite well, I
obviously,
think.
let me switch over to your notes here. I will say again, unfortunately for Louis Foster, we're really hoping to see more of him this weekend, but getting taken out in that first lap incident. But uh, yeah, I mean, great race for Graham, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. P 12 for him. I think he qualified down in what P20 or somewhere down there, a bit further down, even than that, I think. Um, so it's kind of a good race for him, bad race for Di and then just a non-race for Foster. It was kind of a bit of an unconventional, the good, the bad, and the ugly tribute, which I don't think they intended to do, but it's just how that worked out.
Yeah, that's the last several seasons that's a team that has been stuck in a formula that they try every season. Unfortunately, I think we might be trying the same formula again, but
It's gonna work
it,
eventually.
it eventually when Graham is no longer able to get into a car anymore, maybe. But yeah, I mean I hope that Graham can have I don't want to say a breakthrough season because he's what 35. I mean, I think we're a little past the time that he's going to have a breakthrough, but yeah, I mean,
I
finishing
hope he
12th, I
hears
mean,
this, and I hope he takes it as fuel, and I hope he uses it to prove you wrong.
uh, yeah, uh, you know, the whole team, this is a new lineup other than Graham. So, and a pure rookie driver in the series. So, and then Devlin DeFrancesco coming back after being off a season. Um, so yeah, I mean, we'll see how that team shapes up through the year. Ed Carpenter Racing, I'd say he had a decent weekend.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we were both intrigued to see how Alexander Rossi was going to get on with this new team, and he had a pretty strong race, P10. It kind of undersells his performance,
Yeah.
I think, in this Grand Prix because he was really up there at points, I think, as well near the sharp end. But again, a little bit like Rosenquist and Ericsson, maybe where we'd expect to see him in that machinery, and given the competition and everything around it, with how the pit stops work and all that sort of thing. But I think he's one of these drivers where, in this race in particular, he did it kind of P10 does undersell what he was capable of there, and Rasmussen as well, P15, nice solid result there. And again, you think with a
Yeah.
race where there were those essential DNFs at the start of the race, but that only propels you so much further up the grid. You still need to then move your way up there, and you finished ahead of a bunch of drivers. I mean, you finished ahead of Colton Herta. You know, you put it like that, he's had a great weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dale Coyne, I think that was with Renus VK's effort, we mentioned he's kind of
Hmm.
the last piece of the IndyCar puzzle that was put into place just a couple
And he
weeks before
waited
the season started.
just as long as you can wait before putting that last piece down.
Yes, he did. And Renus VK started 12th and finished ninth. And, good top 10 effort for him.
Yeah.
Good to see him running well in that equipment.
Mhm. You know, I think it was a really good race for him, and he'll be pretty happy with that. The team will be pretty happy with that. Dale Coyne is another one of these outfits where they're still learning, they're still building a lot of ways, and for them to have, you're kind of always a little bit cautious, I suppose, for the driver when you see someone of that capability to go into a team that is at that stage of their um, maturity, of when they're still growing. But the immediate comparison I'm thinking of is a little bit as what I'm hoping to see this season with Carlos Sainz and Williams in F1 of we've got a driver that we know is capable of a lot. the team is still trying to figure things out. But if you put the two together, there is a lot of potential for greatness there.
A lot of
And we
potential there.
saw that
Yeah.
immediately with VK with Dayle Coyne, and I hope that's something that isn't a one-off. With Abel
Yeah.
with 23rd, I think that was a again it was fine. I think for a first race for a runner-up who was in a bit of a league of his own in Indy Next. If you kind of
Mhm.
ignore Louis Foster as much as he wishes that he wasn't there, he would have been loving that. But I think
Yeah.
just a non-dramatic race for him. He gets some mileage under his belt. That's probably good enough for this. I think it's a good
Yeah.
starting point as any. He didn't crash. He didn't have any
To
problems. He just got on with it.
exactly. Yep. And that's a great way to start your IndyCar career is just stay out of
In
everybody's
theory,
way,
he's got
keep it
the
on the
thing on
wall.
Foster there. At least I finished.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, and then the new kids on the block, PREMA.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit like
You know, we
Abel there.
we
I think it's both survived their first weekend. They kept their heads down and got on with things. So it's Schwartzman had some issues in practice with the radio and a few other bits and pieces that weren't quite going to plan. But P19, P20 as a finishing position, not too bad. Again, like I
Mhm.
say, you got through your teething issues. You managed to finish the race. You stayed out of the drama, and you're learning as you go. You probably weren't going to get much more than that in theory, unless it had been one of those kind of crazy races. So yeah, what did you think for them?
This is going to be a fun season to watch this team because Callum Isla, not a rookie in the series, but has kind of been kind of in and out of the series for several years.
Yeah,
With everything that happened over at Juncos Hollinger last year, we don't need to rehash that. But and then Robert Schwartzman is kind of this unknown, to
yeah,
IndyCar fans because it wasn't like he was coming up through the F1 ladder, but never made it to that top rung and just kind of was that reserve driver. And
mm.
it's not a name that an IndyCar fan that may be a casual F1 fan is going to recognize. And
It's not a
I
name a
think,
casual F1 fan's even going to know in theory, because a lot of the test and reserve drivers, people, unless they're a driver that was in a team the previous year, they're not going to know about it. And he, as he never made it up that far, like you say, he's one of the
yeah.
drivers that you're just not going to know. He was reserve driver for a couple of teams, test driver for a couple of teams. He was in endurance racing. But again,
Mhm.
if you're just a casual NASCAR IndyCar fan, you've no idea who this kid is. And again, he's been
Yeah.
out of the single seater seat of a race car for a little while now. So to plug him straight into an Indy car, I thought was an interesting one, especially when you've got someone like Dennis Hauger over in Indy Next, making that transfer from Formula Two straight into there. I was
Yeah.
immediately curious to see how that was going to go. So to compare those two and how their seasons go respectively, you're going to maybe potentially wonder what would have happened if they'd been in each other's positions instead. But that's something
Yeah.
we can talk about as the season goes on. But again, I think it's an interesting. It's good, like you said, it's gonna be a fun season to watch for so many reasons, and
Mhm.
we've got
Yeah.
this definition of unknown
Hmm.
on this
A
whole team
lot of
and
unknown.
this driver.
Yeah. Well, and not just with this team, but I mean, almost every team on the grid had driver changes
Yeah,
or went from a five-car operation to a three-car operation or a four-car to a three, So, a lot of uncertainty going into this season that's going to make for a lot of fun storylines to follow for sure. So, time for my favorite segment, the hot and not segment. Who do you think was the hot driver or hot team this weekend?
I think I'm going to surprise you because I'm going to say Meyer Shank, just because of
Ooh,
the
okay.
potential that was there. I thought, again, below Dixon, you expect it from them. So while it's obvious, and Doc Dixon in particular was quite impressive, I just thought from these other teams, I think that's the one where we said we're going to watch a lot of these ones a bit down the pecking order for what they can do. Even, but I think Meershank is the definition of the dark horse because their results doesn't reflect what I think they're going to be capable of as the season unfolds. And I think they've got this quiet confidence where they'll be annoyed they weren't able to show that, but they're not going to let it bother them. So I think there's more there, hopefully, than than meets the eye, and I'm going to deliberately maybe leave them out of my fantasy IndyCar team for a bit to help them out a bit on that one.
Them out a little bit. I'm going with Scott Dixon as my hot driver of the weekend. I mean, you always try to stump me with obscure IndyCar trivia. I've been sitting here trying to think of when was the last time a driver finished second in a race without any radio communication with his team. I mean, you would have to go
Damn, I
back
should have done my homework.
decades, decades and
Decades. Okay,
decades
damn. I've been there a while.
before you got to. I mean, we're talking when in-car radio was
I was about to say,
introduced.
did they have radio?
Yeah. And yeah, that's being able to do what he did without any communication with his team and the spotters just is otherworldly, I think, in this day and age in racing.
Yeah.
So,
And especially for a driver of his kind of experience and stature as well, it's kind of impressive enough when you've got the young up and coming kind of sharp kid on the block, but this is a guy who you could argue that any other driver of his age and his experience would be not incapable of it, but might struggle a bit more with it. Whereas him, he was like, I don't need any of this technology. He's kind of got that
yeah,
what we mean here, that grandpa mentality of I could do this before you were born, sort of
yeah,
idea of it, and go,
yep.
I've got this, don't worry.
So, for my not hot for the weekend, I'm putting it squarely on willpower. I mean, that what a garbage way to start your season. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
still
it's
better than last season, but but yeah, I mean, very uncharacteristic for him, and definitely not what they wanted to start the
no,
season for
no,
sure. So
not at all. I'm with you on that one. I've chosen Aaron McLaren as a team. I've gone for two teams this time for this section. Just Aaron McLaren, just because I think as an entire outfit, um, is the one team I can't make too much of an excuse for. I think every driver in the other teams where I was expecting more from it, the one driver, it was only one driver let them down. Whereas this one, it felt like it was a team effort to
yeah,
disappoint me rather than anything
yeah,
else. But I'll be surprised if it stayed like that. And we've seen it last year. As soon as I berate someone or a team on this podcast, the next race they're back up there. So that's clearly how this works.
yeah. I want to add one aspect to this hot or not segment of ours. I want to throw in a hard luck award. You know, that one
Okay,
driver or that one team that just had just a horrible weekend that maybe wasn't anything of their own doing. And I'm going to put Louis Foster in that
but I was
hard
about to
luck
go
spot.
initially for that. I'm like, damn, I can't agree with them straight away.
Yeah, yeah, and it just uh, unfortunate for him. We expect so much from him this season, and uh, just got taken out on the first lap with nothing of his doing. So unfortunate for him, but we'll. I get the feeling that this season will have no shortage of hard luck awards. So,
I
but
think to to
yeah,
to go with that myself, then I'll go with the other victim from Will Power's first lap incident to go with Nolan Siegel on that one because again,
Nolan
nothing really
Siegel.
of his doing there.
Yeah,
I know potentially mean to stick him in the bin for the not hot section, but at the same time, it's kind of he's in that joint area of just hard luck, but also disappointing. So yeah, I think those two are the obvious victims of hard luck in this week's race weekend.
yeah. So, in other news, you mentioned Dennis Hauger,
Yeah,
Indy
and he
Next
just
winner. It was, I don't want to say it was a boring race. I enjoyed watching it, but he dominated. I mean, that
yeah.
was textbook.
I was very intrigued when he signed up for Indy Next last season for
Mhm.
this year because he was brilliant in Formula 3 and then over the past few years has just not quite managed to make it work in Formula 2 at all in the way that we've seen other drivers be able to. And that surprised so many of us because we thought, okay, you've got three different types of drivers in Formula 2 where some people nail F3 then they're left to immediately. Some take a couple of seasons to get there, and then some have that third season last chance saloon if they really want to make an impression to get to F1. And he was just not doing any of it. I mean, oh God, what's happened
Yeah.
here? But I've never seen such a fall from grace. But then he's come over here and gone, and we're like, that's going to be interesting to see how he gets on, especially as he goes to Indy next rather than IndyCar, because we're so used to people
Mhm.
going from Formula 2 to IndyCar. Um, and for him to just come and dominate like that, like you say, against these
Mhm.
these experienced driver like Lucky Hughes and Colette, you go,
Mhm.
interesting. I'm going to be fascinated to see how that one transpires for the season.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this should be, we kind of, after you saw the drivers that left Indy next at the end of last season, I think we kind of, at least for me, Lockheed Hughes and Cal Colette those were the drivers. That was who we had our eyes on. And then, Dennis comes in and says, well, hold on, guys.
Take that instead.
Let me
Yeah.
show you how this is, let me show you how this is really done. One driver that I don't want to say impressed by, but was glad to see that she had a good performance, and that was Haley Deegan. And kind
Yeah,
of a
I'd agree.
polarizing driver here in America, coming from NASCAR ranks to Indy next, which I thought was kind of a strange move, but I'm applaud her for trying something new. And
Yeah.
yeah, she started last, 21st place in that race, and finished 14th. Avoided all four of the caution flags and gave herself a decent finish. So I don't want to say that she's found her home because it's one race, but it'll be fun to see how she does the next couple of races.
It's an encouraging sign because in testing as well, she was way off the pace for the entire time.
Mhm.
But that's not surprising considering, like you say, the background that she's coming from is quite a switch. But over the course of the 2 days of testing, she managed to increase her speed by 1.8 seconds and close that gap down to whoever, I can't remember who was leading the session now, but probably Helga. But the fact that you go from whatever it was of like 3 seconds down to 2.4 or whatever it was, though however the gap they
Mhm.
reduced it by, that was impressive in itself. So
Yeah.
it's not a season where I'm expecting her by the end to be on a podium or anything, but maybe get a couple of point finishes by the end of the season. And again, if you can keep avoiding these cautions as she was doing and just keep your head down, then
Mhm.
maybe you'll get a couple of few of those better results as well. And that's gonna be really interesting to
Yeah.
see. And I'm always fascinated when drivers come over. We saw that with Leah Block into F1 Academy last year, and you go,
Mhm.
there's rallying into single seater. And you saw how she was trying to use that driving style, and some say, no, that's not how that's going to work. But I love seeing these drivers switching it up that drastically and then seeing how they can improve. And Leah Block did a brilliant job with that last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how Deegan then gets on for Indy next.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have some Indy 500 rumors in the news, some driver rumors, very fascinating rumors, I feel like.
Yes, definitely the first two. I'm just catching up on this now because I've missed these rumors, but I'm always up for a bit of Takuma Sato for Rahal and
Yeah.
Lanigan. Um,
Yeah, that is pretty much I think we are one step away from that being confirmed as a fourth car for Rahal Letterman, Lanigan Racing for the month of May. Um, Catherine Legg is making some grumbles, and it's not that she's returning. I think it's who she's returning for. Um,
yeah,
her her talents and her, well, quite honestly, funding with Elf um, is rumored to be tied to Brian Herta Motorsports, which hasn't run a car in a decade. Brian Herta, of course, Colton Herta's dad is um, a principal at Andretti Global, and it'll be interesting to see if he decides to. I don't know. I haven't heard whether this is a deal where it's a Brian Herta Motorsports with Andretti Global backing, like we'd seen in the past when before uh, Brian Herta Motorsports was absorbed kind of into the Andretti fold, but or if he's going to go out on his own and have some play money and send a car on the track.
Yeah, it's one of those things with the Indy 500 that makes it so fun. You can just do random stuff like this if you want to, and you've got the
Yeah.
capital for it. And then go, yeah,
Yep.
why not? We're going to pull this driver over here. And I think I saw news today or yesterday, Catherine Day going into NASCAR Cup Series.
Yeah. She's making a
So
Cup Series start this weekend at Phoenix. So
yeah, so it's going to be interesting to then go from that into an Indy 500 with this team that's been out for a decade. The sponsors are going to be happy regardless because that's just such a fun story. It almost doesn't matter how you do in the
exactly.
race.
Yep.
But I think why not? And I do love the creativity of an opportunity there of how am I going to get into an Indy 500 this year? Hmm. Okay, there's a team that's not been around for a decade. Let's see what we can do there. Um,
Yeah.
and all, I'll say the last bit of news that you've got on the Indy 500 was this. The next bit was almost more surprising for me, but that's mainly because I misread who I thought the driver was going to be for a second there, and then I saw the rest of the sentence. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
Jewish. That makes more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Possible 36th entry that we've heard some grumblings about. Some rumors is a fourth car at Chip Ganassi that is possibly funded by Tom Brady,
Yeah, not
former
driven by
football
Tom
star for
Brady
the
as I read
Patriots.
that.
Not driven by Tom Brady. He maybe will bring him in as like the pace car driver or something, but that is a rumored ride for Jimmy Johnson.
Which again, another awesome drive from yesteryear, and I'm glad that he's still knocking around, and we can get him in for an Indy 500. I'll be more than up for that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I personally am not a Jimmy Johnson fan. Back from the days of NASCAR, my father was, but yeah. I mean,
I don't have
kudos
all
to
the
him
baggage that you do with him.
for wanting to come back. You know, it was rookie of the year. 3 years ago, I think it was. So um, at the Indy 500. So it's good to see him at least rumored to be tagged for another ride. But I mean, I don't remember the last time we've been this early in the year and we're already talking about bumping not just one car, but now we've got three possible cars that are in bumping scenarios. So it's going to make for a really fun month, and it kind of makes me wish that we still had the old 2 weekend qualifying format, but I'll settle for the one weekend
Vision Fox for
format.
next year.
So yeah. So last bit of driver news that we've got. We did lose a former Indy 500 competitor in Lee Kunzman last month at the age of 80. He started five Indy 500s and then later went on to work for uh, Himmelgarn Racing. It was part of Buddy Lazier's team in 96 when he won. I personally had met Lee a few times out at the track, and Himmelgarn, of course, was a team that I had tried out for in my younger days. And when you're living the fantasy of working for a pit team, pit crew. But
Yeah,
yeah, unfortunate that we lost him. The funeral was this weekend here in Speedway. So, um, but yep, our sympathies for the family there. So we've got a race coming up. It's well, one of my
it's your
personal
favorite.
favorites. Thermal Club is coming up in 3 weeks, and a little less than, or a little over 2 weeks at this point. Um, and March 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fox. We will certainly be looking forward to that, and we'll hope for a better on-track product than what we saw last year. I'd hate for all of these new viewers to come to IndyCar and then we show them a horrible race at Thermal Club similar to what we saw last year. So, but we will be back with an episode after that race, recapping everything for you guys, and we hope that you'll join us then.